Welcome to the Living History Project of Rutgers Presbyterian Church. Rutgers Church was founded in 1798 when Colonel Henry Rutgers donated land for our original church building at the corner of Rutgers and Henry Streets in Lower Manhattan. We've been here at the corner of Broadway and 73rd Street since 1888, before the Ansonia Hotel was built, even before the subway arrived. Of course, the true spirit of a church lives not in its architecture, but in its people. Rutgers has been blessed with a dynamic membership and leadership throughout the years. Progressive thought leaders, civil rights pioneers, distinguished musicians, world-class educators, volunteers, community pillars, entertainers, authors, historians, and artists. The story of Rutgers Church was written by one such member, Dr. Vera Mowry Roberts, in celebration of our bicentennial in 1998. Vera was both historian and history maker. The first female moderator of the Presbytery, Vera Roberts is part of our Living History Project. If you watch and listen, you will encounter some surprising twists and turns. Jackie Robinson will appear, and you'll learn the backstory behind Kermit and Miss Piggy's wedding ceremony. Technology is changing rapidly. The quality of our early recordings is far from high definition, but the archive will grow with the technology. We are grateful for these interviews documenting the faith, wisdom, and memories of church members, elders, and pastors. May they help us continue learning from the saints who have gone before us.
Since I was an elder and had a kind of flexible schedule, I was designated to represent Rutgers at Presbyterian meetings early on, and over a period of years chaired practically every committee that exists in the Presbytery or served on one. And then in the early 70s, the nominating committee asked me if I would allow them to nominate me as moderator of the Presbytery. I said, "Are you out of your mind? This Presbytery has never had a female moderator." Well, maybe it's time. So in those days, the nominating committee was obliged to nominate 3 persons. And at a meeting of the Presbytery, any of the presbyters could ask those nominees any questions they wanted, and then there was a secret ballot to vote for one of them. And the election meeting was held at Rutgers Church. The idea was that the 3 nominees stood before the assembly and were subject to any questioning from any of the persons in the body. And one of the male clergy from a not too distant church stood up on his feet and said, "Now, Vera, do you really think you can do this job?" Well, I had by that time been president of my professional association, which was a 5,000 member national organization. And I moved, all over the country, making speeches and judging plays and so on. So I tried not to laugh, and I said, very seriously, if I didn't think I could do this job, I would not have allowed myself to be nominated. End of questions. Secret ballot taken, and I was elected. The first woman ever
1975.
to be elected. Moderator Presbyterian, 1975.
I think I can say I like Rutgers, I believe in Rutgers and belong to Rutgers because it has a great freedom and variety of people, kind of people I can relate to. New Yorkers who take life seriously but also have fun. And in that setting of the variety of people, all of whom I can relate to, there is also the central belief of the church, liberal but but based on the belief I have in Jesus Christ as interpreted in the Presbyterian Church. Liberal, but faith-based.
When I came to Rutgers Church, I had already been a church organist for nearly 25 years. But I had never played an instrument with more than 2 manuals, keyboards. And of course the Rutgers organ had 4. And I was frankly scared to death to cope with that instrument. This was 1967. And I somehow made it through the service. And my distinguished predecessor, lived in Woodside, came up to me after the service and said, "You played What a Friend We Have in Jesus on the chimes, and you got the job." Never forgotten that.
We were very much involved in the civil rights movement. At the time of Selma and the Selma March, led by Dr. King, many of us at Harvard Divinity School and, of course, in the art as well, were very moved by the images we were seeing on television of the turning back of the march with dogs and fire hoses and all of that, and the beating of many of the first marchers, the first Selma March. So there was a big gathering at the Divinity School to decide what we might do to express some concrete support. And so there was the decision taken that the hat would be passed, money would be collected, and 3 representatives of the doctoral students would be sent to Selma to participate in the next march. And so, Providence, I was one of them. So we got on old Eastern Airlines at that point and flew to Atlanta, where we rented a car and then drove through the night to Selma to join there. So we were part of the second march there in Selma. And that was a very, very tense time, as you may recall. Reverend James Reeb, a Unitarian minister, was killed at the same time that we were there. So that was a very, very formative event in my life, in Margaret's life as well. And you know, many of these things that happen at a relatively tender age have great effect on you the rest of your life.
The event I remember best was a Presbyterian youth rally arranged by Mr. Manassian, held at Rutgers, with Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers as the main speaker. Our sanctuary was filled to capacity, and loudspeakers were set up out on 73rd Street so the overflow crowd could be a part of the event.
Do you have any memory of what he spoke about?
No, all I remember that he stood up there behind the lectern,
Did he?
which we still have in the narthex. But it was a day I will never forget. The excitement and the place filled with young people.
I wonder how we ever were able to persuade him to come.
Well, as I told you, Mr. Manassian was a rug dealer and a wonderful salesman. So he must have sold Jackie on coming.
I can say that another thing that I've done for maps is I bought this map of the Holy Land, which is now Troubled World. So I used my map knowledge and experience to find this to hang in the session room. Some people don't like it. One member said, "We need a map of the world because we're concerned about the whole world." But I think this map is important because it is the Holy Land. So if we're talking about that, we can look at this. If we're talking about what's going on in Syria because we're interested, we can look at that. And very often when I'm listening to the news at night and it mentions some town or village in Syria, like the battles we're in right now, I have no idea where they are. But if I have something like this, I can look it up and see.
There was a woman in that congregation who had accused me of stealing her mother's ashes. The mother had worked as a volunteer in the church office there for 50 years, was a very dear friend of mine, died, was cremated, and the ashes were delivered to the daughter's home, and she immediately called and asked me to come and get the urn because she couldn't imagine having it in her house. So it sat on the file cabinet in the corner of my office. This was in early March, until she called in the summer saying that she was planning a committal service and would I please bring the urn to her. She has a twin who lives in Paris, and from the moment, well, before the mother died, but from the moment she died, these two women were in conflict. Largely classic questions about the estate and so on. So I hesitated a couple of days to be sure that the Paris twin knew that this committal service was being planned, because I knew it would be just like the New York twin to conduct it, have it conducted, and then tell her sister later.
Oh, dear.
So this caused the New York twin to eventually file suit. And in the process of all this, she wrote a letter to the session in which she outed me, saying, you know, it is basically criticizing the way I had handled the situation, but also saying that, Mr. Einstein is not living according to what the Presbyterian denomination expects of him. But again, and of course, as you would understand, there were people in the Mass Standard congregation who intuitively knew I was gay without ever having to talk about it with me. One of my very favorite people, she said, "You may not think you've talked very much about gay issues in your sermons, but I think you've talked about it more than you realize." Which, as I look back on it, probably is true. But you're right, it was quite amazing personally to suddenly have this moment at Rutgers when I just felt comfortable coming out, admitting it in public, for God's sake.
If I can interject, they wanted a real minister.
Oh, yes.
And he wore his regular robe.
That was one of the qualifications. Frank Alls and
Jim Henson.
They said, for this we must have a minister. And John Davis gave my name. This led to the audition, led to the show. I simply had my lines, the lines which I finally had to ask of Kermit and of Miss Piggy. And one of the receptions was at Sardi's. And one of the people in the reception was Liza Minnelli and Art Carney.
Sing the song that you sang.
Oh dear. Then because you share a love so big, now pronounce you frog and pig.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And it's while I was there that Man of La Mancha came to Chicago, and they were holding auditions, and I thought, my plan was always to go to New York at some point, and I thought this will be good experience for me auditioning for this show for Man of La Mancha. So I went and I auditioned, and lo and behold, I got the job. And then was on, and my own song in the show, and was then on tour with that show for 2 years on the road, which was also great. It was a national company, and by that I mean we'd play all the major cities for long periods of time. Every night I would come on stage with Don Quixote, and I was a muleteer, and he was teaching me. I was the youngest of the muleteers, and he taught me the song as I came on stage, and he would say, little bird, and I'd go, little bird in the cinnamon tree, little bird, do you sing for me? And the song went on and on and on. It was wonderful. It was so special for me at that time. And when I first joined the Don Quixote was Jose Ferrer. So the experience with him was wonderful.
This is a segregated park, and I had this little girl, this little white girl with me. I took care of her, but her parents was very much, not segregated. They just loved me, and they wanted to do the right thing. So if you went through this park and you were black, you had to have on an apron. And I had this little girl, I just loved her. She was about 8 years old, and she loved me, and we went holding hands together, and we went into this park, and I couldn't sit because I didn't have the apron on. And she told me, she says, Ethel, sit down. I says, I can't sit. So at that time, the police walked up and said, what are you doing in this park, nigger? I said, I am with Mary Ann. And he says, well, you better hold her hand. And I said, okay. So Mary Ann, she's 8 years old. She said, why you say that? Why would she need an apron? So he says, because she's not supposed to be walking with white people. And I said to myself, I said, God, I pray, if you ever let me come back here to Mobile, Alabama again, I said, I'm coming and I'm going to sit in this park. And when I went back from New York, this park is a little park compared to that, something like that little park out there, compared to Central Park. Because where I was living, didn't live too far from Central Park. So I had my daughters with me. And when I went there, I said, I remember I could never sit in this park. And I told the kids, I said, sit. They said, Mommy, why we have to sit in this little bit of park? I said, sit. I just got so emotional. I said, sit. So they looked at each other. So Valerie, which is always very tough, she said, but this is only a little park. It must be bigger parks than what. I said, just sit. So I sat there and I prayed. I said, thank you, God. I said, because I remember, and I went to the same bench that I couldn't sit on. And this was time, it wasn't quite, it was time of integration, but blacks wasn't taking a part in it like they should, because they still was afraid. So we went over to Walgreens, which was a drugstore across the street from the park, and we went there, and they said, Mommy, we want to have a soda. They didn't know. I said, of course. But the counter was open for them, but the blacks wouldn't sit. So my kids went and they sat there. And then the blacks came out from different parts of the kitchen and different work, and to see my two children sitting at this counter drinking this soda. Well, they born in New York. I mean, what's a little soda fountain for them to sit? So they said, Mama, all the people are looking at us. I said, well, we'll talk about that later. The waitress says, well, what do y'all want? So I said, I don't want anything. My daughter said, well, we want a black and white. So she thought that was funny. So Valerie said, what are you laughing at? So I said, oh God, let's get out of here before they hang us all. So I said, Valerie, she said, where you from, New York? No, she said, where are you from? So my daughter said, we're from New York. Connie was always very quiet, but she was. So anyway, they gave us the drink, and she talked about how long are you going to stay here? So Valerie said, we're not staying here long. She's doing all the talking. We're going home. I don't like it down here. So anyway, it just so much that I just wiped out of my mind.
I had a woman who came backstage when I was doing a Broadway show, and she claimed to have been my third grade Sunday school teacher. I didn't remember her. But she said she always knew I was going to be an actor, because when it came time to do the Christmas play, I demanded to play both Christ and the devil. About Rutgers, I was attracted to this place. We were looking for churches for our kids. We spent a lot of times going to various churches in the neighborhood. We came to Rutgers, and the first Sunday I was there, Janet Parker and Kate Dunn were associate ministers here. And Janet Parker, who's I think in Chicago now, gave a sermon in answer to the Christian rights, traditional family values argument. The Christian right had said that there's a nuclear family, that's God's intent. And Janet gave a sermon about Abraham and said that God chose him to be, and he came from a family that wasn't nuclear at all. He slept with one of the women who worked in his house. It was non-traditional, and this was God's chosen family. So I love the subversiveness of her sermon.
You know, I have been very lucky in my life. There is so much unhappiness and poverty and difficulties. And this is the way I think I can do it. You know, it's not a gift, but it's something that certainly gives me not only pleasure, but kind of fulfilling a need to help people, to do something. And when our guests, I don't like to call them the homeless or something, our guests come up and say, thank you for, it was a wonderful meal. You know, that's worth everything, really. And you sometimes wonder, when you ask, when they come in and say hello, and they ask us how are we? And then we ask them, you know, how are you? But I say, oh, I'm pretty good. And I feel, you know, how can you say I'm pretty good when you hardly have shoes on your feet or anything like that? And that this, at least it doesn't show, but I just admire, or I don't know what the word for people to have this kind of attitude. When they are so down and have difficulties. And I remember one particular person, I remember a few, but there was one woman who was called Ellen, and she lived on the street. And she had this torn plastic bags where she carried her belongings. And she wanted, or she didn't want, perhaps we suggested that we could get her what do you call it, shopping cart. And I bought her a shopping cart. And then she said, she was very thankful, but it was too heavy. I hadn't thought that it's heavy for her to lift it up on the bus. So I bought another one for her, but that was something wrong too. But she was so kind, but she spoke with a little voice, so you had to bend down to listen, and she smelled so badly. It was, and there was once she had been away for a couple of weeks, and then she came back and she was very clean, and she said she had been in the hospital, and she said, and it was, you know, something, and I got Jello. I like Jello, she said, and I got Jello in the hospital. So the following Thursday, or when I went there, I made a big container of Jello to give to her. And she started to eat it. And I said, you know, you don't need to eat everything now, you can save it. I always start to cry when she said, I don't have any place to put the container. So she had to eat everything.
Right.
And then she disappeared. I don't know whether she died or what happened, but But I will always remember that I don't have any place to put a small plastic container. And I also think the meal program, as we are a community here, and the more I've been at Rutgers, I felt it become kind of part of my life. You know, like I suppose it's. I really gotten good friends here, and some kind of this feeling that we have something in common, all of us. Whether it is faith or whether it is helping others, but it's something which automatically you feel this connection, I feel.